How's it going? Welcome back for another week. So we're going to tell some deer stories today.
You're going to tell some deer stories.
Yeah, apparently, so I was talking to Dad, apparently
I never missed a deer.
he shoots all of his deer.
Yeah.
He doesn't miss.
Yeah.
So he has no stories of missed deer.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's all kinds of, some of those stories are the best stories. The deer
Yeah,
that
you
miss.
often hear people say that those are the ones you learn the most from, your failures.
Wow,
The ones that you spend all day tracking or whatever, put in the effort, and then you don't, and you get a chance and you don't connect.
Yeah.
So a lot of reasons you can not connect.
They always seem bigger too.
Yeah,
The ones that you
yeah.
miss.
I'm thinking of the first buck I ever shot at and missed. It was not the biggest buck that I've ever seen for sure, not even close. But
So what was the first buck that there's got to be some stories that I don't know about.
well, and I don't know if you know the story or not. We were. It would be in the 70s, probably late 70s. And hunting with the usual crew, and Dale and Kevin and local around Prescal, and I had tracked a deer on snow, and like I say, it's been so many years now that it's some of the fine details may have gotten a little cloudy, but I tracked the deer, and I remember the deer just stood up in front of me. It wasn't very far away, but there was a tree across the chest, so I didn't have a chest shot. I didn't have, which I would have taken, the biggest part of the deer, but the neck, and the deer was standing there looking at me. And I think there was a tree across the face. I couldn't see the eyes of the deer, but most of the deer I could see, and I had a really good view of the neck. And so I thought, well, that's so close, and the deer standing there. I said it'll be an easy shot. And I remember putting the crosshairs right on the white patch on the throat, and I pulled the trigger, and I was reaching for my knife. And the deer took off, and I went over, and nothing. I mean, no blood, no hair. I had missed completely. So, and like I say, I don't.
So what,
Generally,
did you hit a tree?
No, I just
or
missed the
just-
deer. I must have pulled the shot. I must have. This is the first, as I remember, I'd shot 3 or 4 deer prior, but they were all small deer, no antlers. And this was the first buck that I'd ever. And I can remember seeing the rack and stuff. And
Was it a nice rack or?
no, just a basket rack, just
Yeah.
like a 2.5-year-old buck. And this is the story goes on from there, because I hunted the same area a few days later, and I shot a buck a few days later on snow that I was tracking, and I think it was the same deer. I think it was the same. It was in the same spot, the
All right.
same area.
So that was your first buck.
That was my
Well,
first
that
buck.
was a decent 8-pointer.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
wasn't-
I've got it
yeah,
mounted.
wasn't-
I think it. I think the weight it was 167, and it was a.
Okay.
I think it had 2 kickers on it, which I think both of them were an inch long. I think it was a 10-pointer.
Okay.
Main frame 8 with 2 kickers, a 10-pointer. And but like I say, I'm sure that that was the deer I'd missed a few days before.
So you
And,
ended up getting it.
Ended up getting
so
it.
you-
Yeah.
You didn't miss the deer. You got the deer.
Well, yeah, eventually, but I did
You were
miss it.
just sucking some more fun
And
out of it.
I can remember that when I shot at it the first time, when I missed it, I was getting my knife out, thinking, well, that's a dead deer.
Done deal.
Yeah, never touched it.
Done deal.
Yeah, so that was the first buck that I'd ever shot. It would have been, like I say, late 70s. So you're talking over 40 years ago.
So before I was born.
Yeah, it was before you were born. It was a long time ago.
So actually, I think I'm sitting on that deer.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Behind
Yes, you are. So it would have been in the 80s.
Yeah.
Been the early 80s.
We must have been living in the apartment, so I was under 4.
Yeah, you're right. We had it.
Yeah.
We had a picture of you sitting on
You had
the
it hanging
hair.
from a ladder.
Yeah, behind Mom and
behind.
Dad's house.
Yep.
Yeah. We were staying at the apartment on Fisher Street. So
you didn't bring any notes today either. You were complaining last time, saying I don't keep
Well,
it
yeah. When did you
clued in.
When did you tell me we were going to be talking about deer? Were you today or something?
No, a couple days ago.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't need any
He
notes.
was complaining last
I have
time,
an
saying that
memory.
I throw him under the bus.
Yeah.
I don't give him a heads up what we're going to
Yeah.
talk about. You just fly by the seat of your pants.
I'll fly by the seat
go.
of this work so far.
Yeah.
Fake it till you make
yeah.
it.
Well, I got the faking part down.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the making it part. So yeah, as I was thinking the past 2 days, the one that came to mind is, remember the big buck that Dale missed, and it must have been a big deer. We had snowmobiles in that area we were hunting.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
we drove down. It was a long section of road.
Yeah, the deer walked right by the snowmobile.
And he was watching a crossing. And it was a good crossing.
That was a good. I
A lot
was just
of
going to
bucks
say
crossed
that was a lot of deer.
And
Not only our group, but there was a group from out of state that hunted that crossing. And
so we kind of all in together, multiple sleds, leave Dale at that crossing.
Yep.
And we drove down past the crossing. He was probably sitting, 100 yards away from it? 70 yards?
Yeah.
I mean, not too far away from that crossing. But you could see way down. It was a long, straight road. And it just kind of dipped at the end.
Yep.
And so we drove way down there, and then the road forked.
Right.
And we parked on the corner.
Right.
And we're going to hunt down that road to the left.
And we left our snowmobiles right at
there
the
on the
corner.
road.
Yeah.
So from our point of view, we drove down the road, parked the sleds. Literally, we got like 100 yards down the road, going perpendicular to where he was.
Right.
And we hear a gunshot.
Yeah.
We're like, holy smokes, it was Dale. So we come out where we parked the snow sleds. We must have just been around the corner from the deer.
Because
A deer
we didn't get very far when we heard Dale shoot.
Down the bank, right across from our snow sleds.
Right by him.
Right in our tracks, up the road from where we came towards Dale.
Yeah.
And so him telling the story,
I can remember him telling the story.
he had a little blind set up there of
Yeah.
fir trees and whatnot.
Yeah.
And a blowdown. So he parked his snow sled in behind that blind. And then he was going to load his gun, didn't want it on the snow sled or anything like that, because he was going to sit on the snow sled.
Which would now be legal.
Which would now be legal, but it wasn't at the time.
Yeah.
Put his loaded gun, opened up his gun case,
Right.
sat it in the snow. And he said he just loaded his gun and pulls the gun case over close to his sled so he can just get down on one knee or whatever. And if he sees something, pulls that gun case into position, sits down and looks up. He just saw antlers coming up over the knoll.
He could see the antlers. He couldn't see the body of the deer, but the antlers coming up.
First thing he saw was rack.
Yeah.
And he said he uses a 243. It was a long shot.
Yeah.
And the deer had kind of probably was just going to meander into the ditch.
Yeah.
Wasn't really going to, but he took a shot, Hail Mary shot. And it was a big deer track. And of course he said big rack. He just, that far away. That's all he saw coming up over the knoll. And the interesting thing about that deer, because we tracked it that day.
We did.
That deer took like 3 bounds off the road.
Yeah.
And then it was completely out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
Totally, to that deer, it was just a big bang.
Yeah.
And we tracked it and jumped it from his bed not
We
too
did.
long.
Yeah.
After he fired at it.
We never saw it, but I do remember you and I tracked it, and we did jump it up. And
I was young. I was 14.
Yeah.
And that was a big deer. And sometimes I wouldn't be surprised if it was that deer. Because I shot that deer next year.
Yeah.
In the same area.
Yeah.
And to be able to see rack coming up over a knoll that far away, I can't imagine there was a lot of deer with headgear that
there was
big.
quite a few.
There was big deer in there.
There was quite a few bucks in there at that time.
Because that year, he shot a smaller one that year.
He shot a 200-pounder right there on that.
2 years later.
Did it? Yeah.
Because
I know it was at that crossing that he shot that.
He saw a lot of deer that week on that crossing.
You shot deer on that crossing. Yeah. Joe shot deer on the crossing there.
The year he shot one, was it 202? Nice big heavy 8-point.
It was just over 200. I think it was 202.
Yeah.
Just over 200 pounds.
He'll correct us if we're wrong.
Yeah.
I was sick that year. I had a wicked bad cold and fever. And that first morning, I shot at an 8-pointer down on that other road.
Right. We had left you in the truck.
Yeah.
Jody and I,
that
we
day,
just got out of the truck and we heard you shoot from the...
that was a long shot. That
Yeah.
freehand too. I
Yeah.
shouldn't have done that. And then the next day, or excuse me, that day he shot that 8-pointer. That was 202. The next day, I sat where he shot that 202-pound buck, and I shot an 8-pointer.
The hole in the ear buck?
The hole in the ear buck.
Yeah.
Yeah, it ran up the road towards me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't feeling too good that week. I had a sore throat and fever, and
That wasn't from the lobster stew, was it?
no.
Because you would go up there, and every Friday or Sunday night, the first night at deer camp, we'd have a big lobster stew.
Yeah,
And at the time, when you were young, we really didn't realize of it.
had an allergy.
We found out you're related or
I guess get off
allergic
topic.
to shellfish.
Get off topic here a little bit, but yeah, every first night at deer camp, our first night meal was a big lobster. There was other seafood in it, right?
Right.
It was good. It was a big kind of a seafood stew. And every night at deer camp, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and my cheek would be puffy. And I always thought I had like a clogged duck.
Yeah.
Or something.
Didn't you have trouble breathing too? Didn't you? You know, your respiratory.
Well, sometimes you kind of get it in your head.
Yeah.
You know, you think, well, my cheek's a little bit swollen. Maybe I can't breathe.
Yeah.
So looking back, that could have been a bad situation because we were a long ways in the woods.
Probably 2 hours from Ashland.
I didn't have an EpiPen then. And
we didn't know you were.
I'm sure there was Benadryl in camp, but that wasn't really going to touch.
Yeah.
That wasn't going to get me to the hospital.
No.
And it was a few years later, around Christmas time, I had some shrimp, and I blew up just like I looked like a monster. I had one side of my face all swollen. My hair was sticking up on one side because I had a swollen lump here behind my knees. Yeah. And I look back and think, man, if that happened at camp, that could have been a bad situation.
Yeah.
So I guess, not to get too far off topic, but how about some other bucks that you've missed?
I'm trying to think, Paul. What there was one that I had shot a little deer early in the season.
It's supposed to be big bucks.
I know, but I shot a little deer, and then I went out.
That's right. You shoot all the big bucks.
I went out with my dad, not carrying a rifle, up to camp, up and around Sinclair, and we had gone right across the road from the camp. And at that time, there was quite a few deer, and it was a yard, and there was snow on the ground, and I can remember, and we'd stopped in the woods, Dad and I looked up, and I thought at first it was a moose rack, just a huge rack. It moved. So he had the gun, and I couldn't see it. I knelt down, got it at a little different angle, and I could see the deer standing there looking at us quite a ways down through the woods, but it was a huge buck, huge rack. Of course, I didn't have a gun, and Dad,
he couldn't see it.
He didn't know where it was.
You've got really good eyesight.
Yeah, and it didn't stay long after we made eye. Once we locked and stuff, and he looked at me, and I looked at him. He took off.
Game was over.
That was a big deer. When I first saw the rack, I thought, well, there's a little moose down there in the. So, that's another. I'm trying to think of some of the other. I certainly have missed my share of bucks.
The one that stuck with me the most was that, remember the big buck that I'd brought you in? I had tracked it a few times before, earlier in the season, and there was a big buck. I fired at it that day. It was with a doe. It was crazy. And I've told this story a little bit before, but I was with my father-in-law the first time, kind of on like a pre-deer camp hunting trip. We had snow, and anytime we get snow, you get pretty excited.
We go.
You just want to be out in the woods.
Yeah.
And I drove a long ways that morning and just to hunt on snow, and found a beautiful buck track. And it was interesting because he crossed the road. We drove to the end of the road. I see the buck track crossing the road. So we drove to the end of the road just to make sure nothing else. And he'd gone back across. And it was one of those things where which way was his last track? Because it snowed that night. They were both basically made at the same time.
Yeah.
As far as I was looking at them. And there was another little spur road that went down 90 degrees to the road we were on. And I was like, well, I got a feeling if he went down to the right, he would have crossed that road. And I went down and basically ran that whole road, and he hadn't crossed. So I'm like, well, I'm going to bet that he'd gone across and then back up across to our left when we were driving in. So I was with my father-in-law, and we tracked that deer all morning, and we should have shot that buck that morning because the buck had jumped out onto the skid trail in the woods, and my father-in-law had his gun slung, and the deer just froze and looked at him.
Yeah.
And I just remember Keith saying, "Oh, big buck."
Yeah.
And I was just off to the right. When I come back out, the deer was gone.
Right.
And so we waited there 30 minutes, and of course the deer waited for us.
Yeah.
Went one skid trail over, and we just start to come through the woods, and I see him behind a blowdown just take off, and I fired, I think twice at him, and didn't cut any hair. And then he did all the usual tricks. He gave him some jack furs and just ran back and forth, and we spent so much time trying to figure out where he went.
Right.
And then the day was pretty much over at that time. But I can remember thinking that deer just kept doing, like, there was a bunch of does in there. And he did not want to leave that pocket of woods. So when we went up to deer camp, I can remember telling you, you were like, where are you going to hunt tomorrow? I said, I'm going right up in there. I said, I bet you I can walk up there and find his deer track. And I didn't even have it marked on GPS. Parked on the road, and we walked up in there. Remember, we walked up over the bank, and I was like,
there he was.
There it is, right there. We walked over, and you even said, you're like, wow, it's a
big
track. That's a big freaking deer track. And we should have got him that day.
Yeah.
Because remember, he was with the doe. He hooked up with the doe shortly after we started tracking him.
Yeah.
And they came to a cut, and the doe was out in the cut. And we know he's there somewhere.
Yeah. He
and that son of a gun skirted.
Yeah. He went off
there
to
was
the
a knoll
left
in the middle of that cut.
Yeah. And I remember watching her go right up over the knoll, and we're looking hard for that, figuring the buck is with her
He's
somewhere.
right there
and
somewhere.
He was with her, but he was off to the side. We never saw him.
He basically hooked around this knoll and hooked right back up with her.
Yeah. He came right back.
And then we tracked him all day. And
he stayed with her all day.
All day.
Yeah.
And there was a big blowdown. We'd basically done a loop that day.
Yeah.
And we were coming back towards where we'd started that morning. And there was a great big blowdown. It was one of those awkward ones. There was a big tree.
Yeah.
It must have been 2 feet in diameter or whatever. And it was kind of awkward. You couldn't really step over it.
Or go under it.
And it was in a weird... And I was trying to get underneath it. And right as I'm coming up underneath the tree, I see tails going.
Yeah.
And then one went across the skid trail. And then he went a little further just off into the woods and came across the skid trail. And I shot once at him and didn't get him. That was a big deer. I tracked him a few other times that week and never saw him again. But that was probably the biggest deer that I've ever tracked. I could take all 4 fingers and put him in his track. And that one really, I would have liked to have connected with it.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd like to have that one.
Yeah. One of the other, and it was a big buck. Remember we were hunting an area, and we'd shot a lot of deer down there. Shot a lot of mature bucks, but the bucks were never big.
Oh yeah.
We shot. You shot one that's 6.5 years old, and the same year I shot one that's 5.5 years old, and they weighed like 155 pounds.
Yeah, I think I shot one that was 5.5 or 6.5 that weighed mid 150s.
It was really disappointing.
10-pointer.
Yeah, mature
9 or 10 pointer. Not big racks either, kind of spindly racks and stuff. And the deer population down there was dense. For northern Maine. That
kind of turned me away from that area after we got the age back on those deer. I was like, man, and we shot a number of deer that were mature bucks, 4.5 and I think the biggest one, Jody, was 175. Yeah, it was a nice buck.
He got a 10.
That actually had a decent rack on it.
He got a nice 10-pointer there, and that.
But I never saw huge tracks down there.
No,
never, except for and I missed the buck. About 4 miles in on that road, you couldn't drive this road, and like I said, it was a long road. And
Yeah.
I think where I ended up hunting was about 4 miles in
Yeah.
on this road.
Yeah, I was
But
in
the road still went further. A lot,
right.
A lot
I
further
went
than that.
about 2 miles, and you went
Yeah.
about 4 miles.
So you had gone in one time, and I'm not sure if we had snow yet that year and whatnot, but you'd gone, I think, clear to the end of the road, and it was a long hike
Yeah.
to get to the end of that road. And again, you couldn't drive it. And there was a sapling on one stretch of road that was bent over, and a big buck had gotten in underneath that arch.
Right.
And it tore up the hole underneath it.
Yeah.
And so I'd gone in and looked, and I don't know, I kind of perseverated on that spot after that, seeing that big, and there was a decent deer trail there. So there was a year we didn't have snow, and I'd made up my mind, I'm going to go in and sit there.
Right.
And so that's about the only time I can get motivated to sit.
Well,
no snow.
If you don't have snow.
And there was a big buck going back and forth.
Yeah.
So I go in, and you had shot a deer already that week, or early in the year, and you had gone in with me one day, and I sat up downwind and kind of tucked into a pine tree.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was with you on that.
Jeez, yeah, that was a big mess up on my part.
But there was deer that year. There was deer everywhere through there.
Well, I shot at one. I missed 2 that day.
Right.
One, and I come to find out I was sitting in a bad spot.
Yeah.
So I set up a chair, and I kind of tucked into this pine tree for cover.
I was sitting right behind you.
So I'm watching this trail, and get downwind from it. I thought I was in a good spot. And one thing that, especially big bucks, is when they cross a road, they won't cross on the deer trail.
Yeah.
They'll go up or down from where all the deer are crossing and come out at a different spot.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there, and I think you got antsy.
No, I had to go down.
Oh, you had to use the bathroom.
I had to go to the bathroom.
Yeah. So you take off down the road.
And I jumped 2 deer walking down to use the bathroom.
Yeah.
One while I was actually in the woods taking care of business, I look up and I see a deer walking. I didn't know whether it was a buck or a doe. And then coming back, one took off on the side of I mean, boy, there was a lot of deer in that area.
So you hadn't been gone, I don't know, 15 minutes
10 or 15 minutes, just
and
long enough for me to take care of business.
I'm sitting there, and I feel like I'm being watched. You get that feeling that?
Yeah.
And I look over across, and it's a winter road, so it's a tall grass in the road, and stuff like that. And I look out across the road into the woods. There's a deer looking at me, and the minute we made eye contact, and it was a buck, and I'm not a huge buck, but it was a decent buck, and he took off through the woods. I fired at him running, and I struck a tree. I can remember in the scope, plain as day, seeing a maple tree about 4 inches in diameter, just pieces go everywhere. I'm like, what the heck? Why was he over there? Like, what is up with that? So you come back, and you're like, what happened? And I was telling you. And so you were sitting in a chair behind me.
Right behind you.
You were more exposed.
Yeah.
And so I'm in this tree. Pretty soon we come up through the woods. Here comes a big doe.
Yeah.
Out on that deer trail. And she was big.
Yeah. Well, she was as I remember, she was running.
She was frantic.
She was being pushed.
Yeah. So she comes out, and you could see she skirted across the road, and not a minute or two later, and of course you're thinking, okay, there's gonna be a buck behind her.
Yeah.
So I'm all ready. And now I got the trunk of the tree right here.
Yeah.
And then branches coming across, and I'm all ready. And pretty soon, through the woods, well, where does this friggin' thing come out?
Right to your right.
But behind me, right inside of you, and of course you're whispering in my ear going, big buck.
Yeah.
Big buck. And remember, he had great big thick horns.
Yeah.
Or antlers. People will get all up in arms about someone saying horns.
Yeah.
But remember his neck was all stretched out?
Yeah.
And he was looking
he did
back.
The side
great
to side. Yeah.
So I got this trunk of the tree right here, and I've got a chair with a back on it, and I'm trying to get my gun
out through the bushes,
out through the side of that tree. Yeah. And while you're sitting behind me going, oh, big buck, big buck.
Yeah.
Like, no kidding.
Yeah.
So I get the gun out, And I just get it through the tree, and he jumps, and I fired. And I hit the deer.
Yeah, we found a couple drops of blood, but
and he got into some jack firs, and it was impossible to figure out where he went.
Yeah. Yeah, I can visually see that deer looking right at us, right? He's standing there like
and there wasn't a stick between you and him.
He took a jump and he landed and he saw us when he just froze right there, just looked at us because he was following that doe.
Now, if I would have been sitting where you were, it would have been.
Yeah, it would have been easy.
I mean, I could have shot him from there. He was on top of us.
Yeah.
That was a rough day. I was beating myself up pretty bad that day.
Yeah, things didn't work out.
2 deer in one day. I don't think I shot a deer that year either.
I can't remember, Paul. I don't know what year that was. I
did shoot an 8-pointer there the following year. I'd made it a goal. I'm like, I'm going right back in there. And I sat in a different, I went to the other end of the road.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can see, I don't care where they come
That's
out.
The one.
They're not coming out where I'm at. It's impossible.
I think you shot that on Thanksgiving Day.
Thanksgiving Day.
Because I had come out, I'd shot a buck down the road from you earlier in the week, Monday or Tuesday. And I'd driven out for the day to have Thanksgiving supper with Narda and the family.
That was an interesting...
And you had a long drag out after. That's 4 miles.
And I did it.
Yeah.
What I did was, that morning, they were calling for snow that night.
Yeah.
So we were hunting all week, and I think it was cold that week.
Yeah.
And no snow, loud. And... actually Thursday morning we got a skiff of snow, and it was just enough where I could see deer tracks in the road. And I mean, I like to track deer. And as it was a long walk in, and what I would do is before light, just start booking her in there, and I start seeing deer tracks crossing the road. And there was one. It was in the spot where you shot the deer that year.
Yeah.
There was one that had crossed there, and I almost took that deer track, and I'm like, no. There's not much snow, and it really wasn't that big of a deer. And I was like, the deer must be moving. We're gonna get snow tonight. It'd be good conditions tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I sat down and I sat there. It was 9:30, and I can remember it was dead quiet, and I remember hearing pretty unique sound that a buck makes when it's walking.
Yeah.
You can tell when it's just a steady ch-ch-ch-ch-ch.
Yeah.
I can hear him coming from my left. And I pull up, and he comes out and shot him. So I remember I walk up. It was a nice 8-pointer. Didn't weigh very much. That was a mature buck that weighed 155. So, and I was in there with Jody, and he was hunting another road system down from me. And it was just him and I in this area.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, by the time I get everything cleaned up, and it was 10 o'clock. I'm like, well, I got all day.
And you needed it.
And we have one vehicle, so it's not like I'm going anywhere.
Right.
And I don't want to mess his hunt up. So I'm like, well, I can get this out by dark and meet him back at the pickup. So I would take all my gear, go 100 yards down the road, walk back, get the deer.
And you're dragging the deer.
Dragging the deer on.
Because we have bought carts and stuff, which work really good
because
on
of
this.
that.
Yeah.
I did that all day long. I got to the end of the road. It was like 4:15 and starting to get dark, and it's starting to snow like crazy.
And it's uphill the last... Of course, you have different places it's uphill, but it's uphill a good distance to get to the truck.
So it's snowing like crazy.
Before you get to the truck. Tough.
And it's getting dark. And pretty soon I see a figure walking down the road. You can just barely, nighttime and the white snow, everything's getting white. I can just see a figure walking down to me. It was Jody. He said something like, "What are you doing?" So I'm dragging on
a piece of deer meat.
And so he helped me finish that. I think it was last quarter mile or half mile or whatever. But that was like a 4-mile drag.
Yeah, that's a long way. That was a long. You needed all of that day to get that deer out of the woods.
And I actually, as the crow flies, where I shot the deer, there was a drivable road through the woods, about a half mile, 3/4 of a mile, that followed a brook. And I was half tempted
Well, they
to
had
go
are
through
you
the
talking
woods.
about the spur road if you're walking in on the left-hand side?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a spur road.
But
there.
I was like, I don't know how bad those woods are.
Right.
This was pre-Onyx days.
Right, and we
I
didn't exactly. We didn't know what was.
And I would be dragging the deer further away from the pickup.
If something happened and you couldn't get
And
through.
and I just had figured I got all day.
Yeah.
I just 100 yards at a time. And I did that all day. Bring my stuff up, walk back, get the deer, drag the deer to my stuff. Move my stuff 100 yards. It was chair and everything because I had a chair, gun, pack, and all that stuff. And I just did that all day long and eventually got it out. But
So basically that had been like 12 miles.
it was a long, back and forth.
Right?
Back
4
and
miles in, and then you did 8 miles coming out,
Going back and
dragging
forth.
everything
Back and
because you
forth.
you had to double back
Yeah.
for every,
forth. Just young and,
in shape.
yeah.
Oh, you can still do it.
Oh my God, yeah. I've actually been probably better shape now than I was then.
Yeah.
I didn't take as good care of
Yeah.
myself then.
Yeah. So.
Oh, what else we got?
Well, there was one that I was thinking of. We'd gone up to deer camp, and there again I don't remember the year, but I got a toothache. First night, Sunday night. So Monday morning, everybody's getting up to.
Isn't that the way it goes too when you go to deer camp?
Yeah.
There's something that
Yeah.
invariably comes up. You get sick,
Yeah.
sore throat,
I had an awful
something
toothache.
stupid that.
So at 4:30, when they were getting up to go hunting, I'm driving back to Fort Fairfield and going to see my dentist and have that tooth pulled, which I did. And
They didn't want to pull it.
no, he did. He wanted to put he pulled.
Oh,
it.
I thought you kind of argued
no,
with him there.
No,
Like, no,
Dr. Cassidy says you will take care of that. No, I get out of the woods. We called up about 7:30 or so when they opened. He said you come right down, and because he had taken care of it a few months before, and he told me when he said, Mark, I'm right on the nerve. I don't know if this is going to work.
Yeah.
He told me that. He said, this may not work. He said, I'm right at the nerve. And that took off while I was, of course, at deer camp. It was the worst pain that I've ever had. Toothache is the worst pain I've ever had. Broken bones or whatever. It's
Well, for you to come out of camp.
yeah. So
Yeah.
he took care of it. He got me right down there at 7:30 when they opened. It was a 5-minute deal for him to do it. It was a half an hour for the anesthesia to kick in. He gave me the shot and then waited a half an hour, did what he needed to do, come in and reefed on it, pulled on one side, pulled on the other, and straight up. And it was
Instant relief.
Instant relief. I was back at deer camp that night and had supper with the boys. So the next day we're going into our usual spot, and I come across the track off the old winter road that you would shot your big deer on, the north end of that winter road. Track come right out of it. And wasn't a real, but you could tell it was a buck. So I started tracking it. This would have been Tuesday. And I tracked that all day. That went across cuts, and it went out, and it just went all day long, never stopped. And I get hot. The sun was out. We had snow, obviously, and the sun was out. And I unzipped my coat, and then although I unzipped my wool coat, I zipped my orange vest back up. Which was, later on in the day, I found out that was a big mistake because I finally caught up to I remember I came to a place where there was other deer tracks, like a doe. And it was late in the afternoon, and I tracked the deer all day. And I'm looking around, I'm looking at the tracks and stuff, and they're mingling around. He's finally stopped, he's not beelining out of there, and he's meandering around with the other deer tracks. And I remember I looked over, and he's laying right on the skid trail looking at me. He had a little basket rack, like a 10-pointer. And his head was going, how they right sideways. He's looking right at me, not a twig in the way between us, not very far. And I pulled up to shoot, and I couldn't get the butt of my gun up to my shoulder. And I'm going, what the heck is going on?
It's almost like a bad dream.
Yeah, and finally I realized, I was fetched up on my blaze orange vest. The gun was in under my wool coat. The butt of the gun was in under my wool coat, but when I tried to lift it up to my shoulder, because my orange vest was zipped up, it would fetched up on that.
Yeah.
And when it took just the second or two that I realized what I had to do, I pulled the butt of the gun out of my coat, put it up to my shoulder. That deer got up and took off, and I fired. Didn't hit it. And like I say, that was right at the end of the day. And I did track it for a few more minutes, but I was a long way from the truck. In fact,
you'd crossed a bunch of roads.
I crossed a bunch of roads.
You didn't really know where you were.
I coming out, I won't say I was lost, because I went back to the last road I'd crossed and started heading for the truck. But it was a different road system.
Didn't you keep saying, yeah, it's something didn't make sense? You're like, I need to be headed towards, there was a knoll.
What had happened was,
you're like, I need to be headed towards that knoll.
And there was some other roads going off to the left, but I had no idea where they went. So I'm headed west towards the Allagash River. And I'm headed directly west on this road, and it's getting late. Pretty soon I look, and I know where my truck is on a knoll off to the left. There was a valley and thick woods and stuff.
And that's like miles away.
I said, my truck is right there, but yet I'm going by it.
Yeah.
I went by it. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to bushwhack at this time of day down through that valley and get to the truck. So I'll follow the road. It has to, go somewhere. If you go a few miles, you're going to hit the Allagash River. So I stayed on it. And I went all the way down to where you're talking about. Dale had shot at that deer. Yeah. There was this road that went off to the right.
Hooking around there.
Come all the way down to that.
That's a long ways.
And had to double back all the way back up. Up to the truck.
You were spitting blood all day too, weren't you?
I was, yeah, from the tooth there that I had pulled, which wasn't. There was no pain, just a little bit of blood.
A real man would have just pulled it at camp.
Yeah.
It's easier said than done.
Funny story about that deer too. I believe that Derek shot that deer in the same area on that winter road a few days later. It was a basket 10. I'm quite sure it was the same deer. Of course, he probably made a swing and came back to where I picked him up, because that's where Derek shot a basket 10. He got a basket 10. I'm pretty sure that's the same. That was the same deer.
Yeah,
but it was like a bad dream. I pulled that gun up, and his head was bobbing back and forth. You knew he was gone in a second, and he did give me enough time. If my gun hadn't fetched up in my my vest, I'm sure I would have. He was laying right there looking at me. So
you have missed a few.
I fired it like that when he was in full flight when I fired at him.
Throw some lead at him. I'm not afraid to do that.
No, I did. But that's a common example right there. That deer, I remember all day long, he just walked, and I get overheated. And he walked and kept going, and pretty much in a straight line. And it wasn't until he came, he knew where those does were. And when he came to where I finally hit other fresh tracks, he was right there. Yeah.
And that's, that always, and we've talked about it before, but like deer almost always will bring into other deer.
And certainly a buck, that's what
they're looking for.
He's looking for does.
And probably it's two reasons why I don't, if it's first thing in the morning and it's like a mediocre buck and it's fresh, I don't mind taking that. And probably because the first buck that I ever shot was a big buck that happened that exact scenario. Right. We had snow that ended early that morning. And like a lot of times when you get a fresh snow, it's next to impossible to find a deer track.
Yeah.
And we didn't even know if it was a buck. It was a half snowed in deer track. And like, well, this is the only thing going. So we'll start in on this and then see what transpires. And we get in, jumped up that deer. Yeah. And sure enough, we, tracked him a little ways and boom, there was a big buck track. And we didn't go, I don't know, a couple 100 yards.
Yeah, we didn't go very far.
And shot that.
If that.
Deer. Yeah. So I guess that's always in my head. That it happened then, it can happen again. Well, I can get on a mediocre buck, and you don't know what's going to.
And I've told the story before here that the biggest deer I ever shot, 240 pounds. That I came to a doe and a lamb, and I backtracked, and I didn't backtrack 100 yards, and he was coming up.
Yeah.
He was coming up. I'd hit the tracks, and I remember the little fawn. He was walking right on the crust. The doe was, and we had a really thick crust, obviously, because the little feller would walk right on top of it. And now I didn't go 100 yards, and the buck was coming up, following him. So.
And now that you mentioned that, it seems like all of the big deer that I've shot was never the result of some miraculous plan I'd put forth.
Right.
It always ends up being like stuff happening on the fly.
Something you don't anticipate happening. Yeah.
Because anytime that I've, oh, this is what I'm going to do, and this is
is how it's all going to work out. I can picture in my mind when I start tracking it how it's going to work out.
The times that I've shot big deer, it was heck. I probably wasn't even started on a big deer, and it just kind of the way the days of events went. You couldn't have planned it.
No,
couldn't have written it out that way. So I guess that's one of the interesting things. But any other ones that? I think we're almost an hour in.
Are we?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, Paul. What? There's a lot of deer that I've missed over the years and stuff. Obviously, I've hunted a lot of years. I've had deer hunted over 40 years. So.
Yeah, it's bound to happen.
Yeah. There's a lot of deer that.
I think of that. Remember that? So I guess another example of. Not having a plan that, that's gonna, and you end up shooting a nice deer was that, remember that 215 pounder that I shot? It was my first year of grad school. We had two hard winners back to back.
Oh, you mean, yeah.
And it was you and I eventually together when I shot the deer.
One you tracked for 3 days?
3 days.
Yeah.
And I can remember all I cared about coming back was I hadn't had a chance to hunt all fall. And I was kind of burnt out. And I was like, I just want to get out in the woods. And I felt like the chances of me shooting a deer were slim to none because the deer population had been hammered.
It had.
So bad. And I was like, I just want to get out.
That had been around 2010?
2009.
2009. Because we had
2007, 2008.
Two really bad
winters.
We had record snowfall there, 2008 or whatever, over 200 inches.
So my thought of, I'm going to go out and shoot a deer in my 3 days to hunt.
Yeah.
I just was grateful to get out. And I can remember tracked that deer the first day. And I fired at him that day. I caught up to him.
With your father-in-law.
And got a shot at him running. And... Then I believe it was, if I recall, first or second day. Anyway, I ended up leaving him in a pocket of does, and I can remember it was the end of the day. And I was like, I'm going to come back tomorrow. I'm not going to mess this all up in here. It's like 2 p.m.
Right.
There were beds everywhere. I'm like, the road is right handy. I'll come back up in here tomorrow and probably can pick him up. And then you'd come up with me the next day.
Right.
And we went up, cut his track with a doe, and ended up shooting him that day. He didn't want to leave that.
No, we get right in between them.
Yep.
We get right in between the
jumping him up, and he would not.
He would not leave the doe.
Not leave her.
And when we finally did split him up,
he was looking for her.
He came right back. In a matter of a few minutes, he came right back.
And we were talking to each other because you were in.
Yeah, I could hear the doe in front of me.
And you were like, the doe's right here in front of me.
Yeah,
and as you're talking to me, I'm like, okay, I couldn't see you, I could hear you, and I hear something. And I'm like, well, that's not Dad coming towards me.
Yeah.
And he's coming around to my right, and I picked out an opening, and that was the end of it. And there was just a moment of confusion there, where he's looking for her.
Yeah, he did.
Can't figure out.
He did not want to leave her.
He's probably figuring there's not many deer left. He's got to try to procreate. And create more.
He had to stick with what he could find.
Possible.
Yeah, that was
a good hunt.
And there was, like you say, there was very few deer that year.
And that was the first time
we didn't go to deer camp.
Nope, because of that.
It
was almost pointless.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I ever. I can remember. I don't know if you remember this. the deer was laying there, and I was like, I just want to sit here and enjoy it for a little while.
Yeah.
Because it happens so few and far between. And in years past, you shoot a deer, and you can't wait to hurry up and get it out, and you just want to do it all.
Right.
Clean it out, drag it out.
Well,
and I kept saying, I just want to enjoy it. I just want to sit here for a while and just like look at it and enjoy it and savor the moment.
And I remember we must have had GPSs because we had tracked all day long. It was later in the afternoon when you shot the deer, and of course we didn't know what we were looking at for a drag and getting it back to the truck. And I think we were only 0.2 of a mile from the road.
I think it was like 1/10.
Wasn't far.
Oh yeah,
it was right there.
Because we were like, oh, Jesus, this is gonna be a long.
Yeah, we get our GPSs out and we looked and the road's right there.
Right there, and I think the truck was parked not far.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. We were near the truck. I think we had gone down. We went down the hillside, and there was a spur road off to the right, and I think we were parked down off to the right.
Okay.
But you had parked on that hillside before.
Yeah.
You had seen that deer on that hillside.
Yeah.
And I think that it was just down around the corner. We hit the road, walked down the hillside,
grab the truck,
and the truck was just off a spur road.
Yeah.
If you'd gone by that spur road and kept going straight, there was a camp there on the right hand side.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a good hunt.
So
that worked out good. Well, there. Hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, those are some. I like deer stories. Like telling deer stories. Like hearing deer stories. So even though it's fishing season, you can always talk about deer hunting.
Yes, yeah.
It's always fun to talk about deer hunting.
Yeah, we're already thinking of it.
You put some trail cameras up.
I just put out a trail camera.
Maybe we'll have some pictures to put up.
Hopefully. And I set it on video. I usually have still photo, but I set this one on video there. And see if we can get some video of deer, moose, bear.
Well, there, we appreciate you watching. So until next time, get outside.
It's good for the soul.
See ya.